All credit goes to my younger son James, who will be taking over as chairman and CEO.
The champagne was still fizzing on my lips when my father handed my life to my brother on a silver platter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dad's voice boomed across the rooftop terrace, cutting through the Manhattan night like a blade. The city sparkled below us, 40 floors down, while 200 of the city's elite turned toward the makeshift stage. Tonight marks not just the IPO of Hartwell Properties, but a new chapter in our family legacy. I stood there in my $1,000 suit, feeling like the biggest fool who ever lived. 20 years I'd spent building this company from nothing. Started in a garage in Queens, hustling properties nobody else wanted, turning crack houses into penthouses. 500 million in assets. My sweat, my blood, my sleepless nights. All credit for this remarkable achievement goes to my younger son, James, Dad continued, his weathered face beaming with pride I'd never seen directed at me. "Who will be taking over as chairman and CEO, effective immediately." The crowd applauded politely. My wife Sarah smiled that perfect smile of hers, the one she'd practiced in mirrors since she was 16. She looked stunning in her red dress, the one that cost more than most people's cars. Her arm was linked through James's. My younger brother, the golden boy who'd never worked a day in his life. Furthermore, Dad's voice grew warmer. "I'm delighted to announce the engagement of James to Sarah Hartwell." The world stopped spinning. The champagne turned to acid in my mouth. Sarah held up her left hand, showing off a ring that caught the city lights like a disco ball. My brother kissed her cheek while cameras flashed. The crowd erupted in celebration. I stood there, invisible in my own company, watching my wife become my brother's fiancée, while my father gave away everything I'd built. "Michael," Dad's voice finally acknowledged my existence. "I'm sure you understand this is what's best for the company." Best for the company? Right. What's best for the company was apparently screwing over the guy who'd actually built it. I didn't make a scene, didn't throw my drink or start screaming. I just smiled, set down my glass, and walked to the elevator. Let them have their party. Let them celebrate their brilliant coup. But as those elevator doors closed, cutting off the sound of their laughter, I made myself a promise. They thought they were so smart, so superior. They'd underestimated me my entire life. They were about to learn their first lesson about the difference between taking something and keeping it. The next morning, I arrived at the Hartwell Properties building at 6 a.m., 2 hours before anyone else. The security guard, Tony, waved me through like always. Poor bastard had no idea he'd be looking for work by noon. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor, to the corner office that used to be mine. The nameplate still read Michael Hartwell, CEO. They hadn't even bothered changing it yet. Inside, I fired up my computer and got to work. 20 years in this business teaches you things, like how to hide assets in shell companies, how to redirect automatic payments, how to make a $1 million company look broke on paper with just a few keystrokes. I'd always been careful, always prepared for the worst. Turns out the worst was my own family. By 7:30, I'd transferred $3 million from our main operating account to a company I'd set up years ago in Delaware. Just temporarily, of course. A little cash flow problem to keep the new management busy. At 8, Sarah walked in. She looked different somehow, confident in a way she'd never been around me. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her smile sharp as a knife. "Morning, honey," she said, not bothering to look up from her phone. "I hope you slept well." "Like a baby," I lied. I'd been up all night planning. "Good, because we need to talk." She finally looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Something cold. "About the transition." "What transition?" She laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, Michael, you're really going to make this difficult, aren't you?" Before I could answer, James walked in. My brother looked like he'd stepped off the cover of GQ. Perfectly styled hair, designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, shoes that gleamed like mirrors. "Brother," he said, spreading his arms wide like we were meeting at a family reunion instead of a corporate coup. "How are you handling the big news?" "Which part? The part where Dad stole my company or the part where my wife is apparently marrying my brother?" Sarah's smile turned predatory. "Ex-wife. I filed the papers yesterday." Of course she did. Efficient as always. "Look, Mike," James said, settling into the chair across from my desk like he owned the place, which, I guess, he did now. "This doesn't have to be ugly. Dad's offering you a generous severance package. $2 million, full benefits for a year. Not bad for someone who was just an employee. Employee. 20 years building this empire, and I was just an employee. That's very generous of you, I said. Both of you. Really touching how you worked this all out together. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smirked. Jessica's dying to know how you're taking the news. She always said you'd never see it coming. Jessica, Sarah's best friend, the one who'd been whispering poison in her ear for years, the one who'd convinced her she was too good for a guy from Queens. Tell Jessica I'm taking it exactly how she predicted, I said, like a complete fool. They exchanged a look, a satisfied, self-congratulatory look that made my blood boil. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, James said, standing up. The board meeting is at 10. We'll need your passwords and access codes before then. Of course. Wouldn't want to keep the new management waiting. I spent the next hour giving them everything they asked for. Passwords, codes, account numbers. They thought they were so clever, so thorough. They had no idea I'd been 3 steps ahead of them since the moment I walked in. At 9:45, Sarah's phone rang, then James's, then the office phone. What do you mean the payroll account is frozen? Sarah was saying into her phone, pacing back and forth in front of the windows. James was having a similar conversation. Something about vendor payments being rejected, credit lines being suspended, accounts showing 0 balances. I sat back in my chair and watched the show. Michael, Sarah said, hanging up and turning to me with fury in her eyes. What did you do? Me? I didn't do anything. I'm just an employee, remember? The office door burst open and 3 board members rushed in, all talking at once. Their faces were red, their voices high and panicked. Something about margin calls and frozen assets and the SEC asking questions. Gentlemen, I said, standing up and straightening my tie, looks like the new management has some fires to put out. I'll leave you to it. I walked toward the door, but James grabbed my arm. You son of a bitch, he hissed. What did you do? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. For a second, I saw fear there. Good. I taught you your first lesson about the difference between taking something and keeping it, I said quietly. Now let go of my arm before I teach you a second one. He let go. I walked out of my former office, past the panicking board members, past the ringing phones, and the chaos I'd created with a few simple keystrokes. In the elevator, I allowed myself one small smile. They wanted to play games? Fine, but they were playing in my house, by my rules, with my pieces. And I'd been planning this game a lot longer than they had. That afternoon, while James and Sarah were dealing with their little financial crisis, I had lunch with Patricia Wells from the Manhattan Herald. Patricia owed me a favor from when I'd given her the exclusive on the mayor's real estate dealings 3 years ago. I have a story for you, I told her over Caesar salads at the Four Seasons, about family loyalty, corporate greed, and the kind of betrayal that would make Shakespeare proud. Patricia's eyes lit up. She'd always been hungry for scandal, especially when it involved rich people behaving badly. I gave her everything. Photos of Sarah and James together at various hotels over the past 6 months. Text messages I'd found on Sarah's phone about upgrading her man and getting rid of dead weight. Financial records showing how Dad had been secretly planning this takeover for months. This is explosive, Patricia said, scrolling through the evidence on her tablet. But I need more, something that really shows their character. I smiled and pulled out my phone. How about this? I played her a recording from the previous night. Sarah talking to Jessica, laughing about how stupid I was, how easy it had been to manipulate me all these years, how she'd been planning this with James since Christmas, how they'd been sleeping together since my birthday party. He actually bought me flowers yesterday, Sarah's voice giggled from the phone. Like that was going to make up for 20 years of boring middle-class bullcrap. I can't wait to see his face when he realizes his little Queen's accent doesn't fit in our world anymore. Patricia's jaw dropped. My God, Michael, this is brutal. It's honest, I said. Sometimes the truth is brutal. The article ran online that evening. By morning, it would be front page of the print edition. By then, every social media platform in the city would be buzzing with the scandal of the Hartwell family's very public, very ugly implosion. I was home by 6, sitting in my study with a glass of whiskey when the calls started. First Sarah, screaming incoherently about lawsuits and invasion of privacy. Then James, threatening to destroy me. Then Dad, demanding I meet him at his club immediately. I let them all go to voicemail. I had more important things to do, like visiting my dear brother's penthouse. James lived in a glass tower on the Upper East Side, the kind of place that screamed new money to anyone who knew how to look. I had keys, of course. Sarah had given them to me months ago when she was still pretending to be my wife. I let myself in at midnight. The place was empty. James was probably still at the office, trying to explain to investors why his company had suddenly developed a severe case of financial dysfunction. His apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a guy who'd never worked for anything. Expensive furniture with no personality. Art bought by decorators, not because he loved it. Everything perfect, everything hollow. I started in his bedroom, found the drawer where he kept his important papers, his passport, his backup credit cards. I photographed everything, uploaded it all to a cloud account I'd set up specifically for this purpose. Then I moved to his closet. $1,000 shirts, handmade shoes, suits that cost more than most people's cars. I didn't damage anything. I'm not a vandal. But I did leave a few gifts. A stack of photos under his pillow, him and Sarah, but not romantic ones. Surveillance photos I'd had taken by a private investigator, showing them at cheap motels, groping each other like teenagers. The kind of photos that would make anyone wonder why they couldn't just use his expensive penthouse. In his medicine cabinet, I left a printout of Sarah's medical records. The ones showing her STD tests from 6 months ago. The ones showing she'd been seeing a doctor about fertility issues. The ones that mentioned she'd been trying to get pregnant, but not with me. Finally, in his home office, I left the real bombshell. Financial records showing how much money Dad had been secretly funneling to James over the years. Payments disguised as consulting fees, property deals that never existed, a trust fund James didn't even know existed. All of it documented, all of it technically legal, but all of it proof that James had been living off Daddy's money his entire life while I'd been building the family fortune. I was about to leave when I heard the elevator. James was coming home. I could have hidden, could have waited for him to leave again. Instead, I poured myself a drink from his expensive whiskey collection and waited in his living room. He walked in at 1:30, looking exhausted and frustrated. His perfect hair was mussed, his tie loosened, his expensive suit wrinkled. He looked like a man who just spent 12 hours discovering that running a company was harder than it looked. "Hello, brother," I said from his couch. He jumped about 3 feet, spun around, and stared at me like I was a ghost. "What the hell are you doing here? Visiting family. Isn't that what brothers do?" His hand moved toward his phone, probably to call security. I held up my own phone. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, unless you want everyone to see the photos I just uploaded to every major news outlet in the city." He froze. "What photos?" I showed him the screen, pictures of him and Sarah at the Plaza Hotel, the Ritz-Carlton, even that dive motel in Brooklyn where they thought nobody would recognize them. "You sick bastard," he whispered. "You've been spying on us." "I've been protecting my interests. There's a difference." I stood up, walked over to his bar, and poured myself another drink. His whiskey really was excellent. I'd have to remember the brand. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, not turning around. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to call an emergency board meeting. You're going to announce that after careful consideration, you've decided the company needs more experienced leadership. You're going to recommend that I be reinstated as CEO." "Like hell I will." I turned around, smiled at him. "Then I guess Patricia Wells will have some very interesting photos to run with her follow-up story, along with Sarah's medical records, your financial history, and a few other tidbits I've collected over the years." His face went white. "You wouldn't." "James, I built a $500 million company from nothing. I survived growing up in Queens with a father who thought I was worthless and a brother who got everything handed to him. You think I won't destroy you to get back what's mine?" We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, his shoulders sagged. "What about Sarah?" "What about her? She made her choice. Now she gets to live with it." I finished my drink, set the glass down on his expensive coffee table without a coaster, and headed for the door. "Oh, and James?" I turned back to him. "I'd check your bedroom if I were you. I left you some reading material." I was almost to the elevator when I heard him scream, high-pitched, like a little girl. It echoed through the hallway, bouncing off the expensive marble walls. The next morning, I was back in my office by 7. The nameplate had been changed overnight. It now read, James Hartwell, CEO. Someone had been optimistic. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Sarah burst in without knocking. She looked like she hadn't slept, which was probably true. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, her red dress from the night before wrinkled and stained. "You bastard!" she screamed. "You sick, twisted bastard!" Good morning, Sarah. You look lovely today, really. She slammed a newspaper down on my desk. The Manhattan Herald's morning edition, featuring a front-page story with the headline, Family Affair, Real Estate Dynasty, Torn Apart by Betrayal and Greed. Below it was a photo of her and James at the Plaza Hotel, looking very much like two people who weren't married to other people. This is defamation, she snarled. I'll sue you for everything you have. With what money? Your accounts are frozen, remember? Along with James's and your father-in-law's? Her eyes widened. You didn't. I did. Turns out, when you control the banking relationships for a $500 million company, you have a lot of influence over personal accounts, too. Funny how these things work. The door opened again, and James walked in. He looked worse than Sarah, pale, shaky, like he'd been drinking all night or throwing up all morning, probably both. You son of a bitch, he said, but there was no fight left in him. You've destroyed everything. I've corrected a mistake, I said calmly. The board meeting is in an hour. I trust you've prepared your resignation speech? Before he could answer, my assistant knocked on the door frame. Mr. Hartwell, your father is here to see you. Dad walked in like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. But there was something different about him today. He looked old, tired, deflated. The man who'd stood on that rooftop last night, giving away my company like it was a party favor, was gone. In his place was a 70-year-old man who just realized he'd made a very expensive mistake. Michael, he said, his voice careful, measured. I think we need to talk. I think we're past talking, Dad. Way past. The SEC called this morning. They have questions about our financial reporting. Investors are pulling out. Our stock price dropped 30% overnight. Sounds like a problem for the new management. Sarah stepped forward, her voice desperate now. Michael, please! We can work this out. We can all work this out. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman I'd been married to for 8 years. This woman I'd loved, supported, built a life with. This woman who'd been planning to destroy me for months while smiling at me over breakfast. Sarah, I said softly, do you remember our wedding day? She nodded, confused by the change in my tone. Do you remember your vows? For richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part? Michael, I believed you. I actually believed you meant those words. I thought we were building something together. A life, a future, a family. Tears started forming in her eyes. Real ones, not the crocodile tears she used when she wanted something. We were, she whispered. We were building something. No. You were using me to build something for you. There's a difference. I stood up, walked to the window that looked out over Manhattan. 42 floors below, people were going about their lives, completely unaware that the Hartwell family was imploding in slow motion. Here's what's going to happen, I said without turning around. Sarah, you're going to sign the divorce papers I've had drawn up. You'll get the house in the Hamptons and $50,000. That's more than you brought into this marriage. Michael, that's not fair. You want to talk about fair? I spun around, and whatever she saw in my face made her take a step back. You plotted against me for months. You stole my wife, my brother, my company. You humiliated me in front of 200 people. And you want to talk about fair? James found his voice. What about me? You get nothing. Well, not quite nothing. You get to keep your penthouse until the bank forecloses on it. Should be sometime next week. Dad cleared his throat. And me? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd never believed in me, who'd always favored my younger brother, who'd handed away my life's work like it was a consolation prize. You get to live with what you've done, I said simply. Every morning for the rest of your life, you get to wake up and remember that you destroyed your own family for no good reason. The door opened and my assistant appeared again. Mr. Hartwell, the board is assembled. I straightened my tie, picked up my briefcase, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Sarah asked. To accept James's resignation and resume my position as CEO of the company I built. Michael, wait, Dad called out. What if we refuse? What if James doesn't resign? I stopped in the doorway and smiled. Then tomorrow morning, every newspaper in the city runs photos of Sarah and James at that motel in Brooklyn, along with financial records showing how you've been embezzling money from the company to support James's lifestyle, along with audio recordings of Sarah planning this whole betrayal with Jessica. I looked directly at each of them. I've been building this revenge for 20 years. Every time you made me feel small, every time you treated me like I didn't belong. You wanted to play games with my life? Fine. but I'm better at games than you are. The boardroom was packed. All 12 members were there, plus several investors and a lawyer I didn't recognize. Everyone looked nervous, uncomfortable, like they'd rather be anywhere else. James took his seat at the head of the table, but he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Sarah sat in the back corner, still wearing her wrinkled red dress from the night before. "Gentlemen, ladies," James began, his voice shaking. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I've called this meeting because... He couldn't finish the sentence, just sat there, staring at his hands. "Because he's realized he's not qualified for the job," I said, standing up. "And he wants to do what's best for the company." One of the board members, Harold Peterson, spoke up. "Michael, with all due respect, the decision was made yesterday. The ownership structure is clear." "Is it?" I pulled out a folder from my briefcase. "Because according to these documents, the company bylaws require unanimous board approval for any change in executive leadership. Yesterday's vote was 8-4, not unanimous." Peterson looked confused. "But your father owns controlling interest." "Actually, he doesn't." I pulled out another set of documents. 3 years ago, when we needed capital for the Brooklyn project, Dad signed over 45% of his shares to the company as collateral. He forgot to reclaim them when the loan was paid off. Those shares automatically defaulted to company control, which means the board has majority ownership, not the Hartwell family. The room erupted. Board members shouting questions, lawyers shuffling papers, investors checking their phones. Dad's face went white as he realized what I'd done. "Furthermore," I continued, raising my voice above the chaos, "as the CEO who structured that loan, those 45% of shares fall under my direct control as company assets." "That's impossible," Dad said, finally finding his voice. "I would have known." "You would have if you'd ever bothered to read the documents you signed, but you were too busy playing golf and planning my downfall to pay attention to the fine print." I turned to address the entire room. "I've spent 20 years building this company. I've generated over $500 million in value, created 3,000 jobs, and turned Hartwell Properties into one of the most successful real estate firms in the state. Yesterday, you tried to hand control to someone whose only qualification is his last name." James started to stand up, but I wasn't finished. "My brother has never closed a deal, has never managed a project, has never done anything except spend money he didn't earn and take credit for work he didn't do. And yet, because of family politics and personal vendettas, you were willing to put him in charge of everything we've built together." I looked directly at Sarah. "Along with a woman whose idea of business strategy is sleeping her way to the top." Sarah's face turned red. "You can't." "I can, and I am. The financial chaos you've all been dealing with today? That was a demonstration. A preview of what happens when unqualified people try to run a complex business. I created those problems with 3 keystrokes. 3. Imagine what your competitors could do if they realized how vulnerable you've made yourselves." I turned back to the board. "So here's my proposal. James resigns, I resume my position as CEO, and we pretend yesterday never happened. In exchange, I'll fix the financial problems I created, restore confidence with our investors, and continue building this company into something we can all be proud of." "And if we refuse?" Peterson asked. I smiled. "Then tomorrow morning, every major newspaper in the city runs a story about how the Hartwell Properties Board of Directors was willing to destroy a $500 million company rather than admit they made a mistake. Your careers in finance will be over before lunch." The silence stretched for what felt like an hour. Finally, Peterson spoke up. "All in favor of accepting James Hartwell's resignation and reinstating Michael Hartwell as CEO." 9 hands went up, then 10, then 11. All eyes turned to Dad. He sat there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Anger, respect, regret. Finally, slowly, he raised his hand. "Motion carries," Peterson said. "Michael, welcome back." I walked to the head of the table, where James was still sitting. He looked up at me with something that might have been relief. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not destroying me completely. You could have, but you didn't." I looked down at my little brother, this man who'd tried to steal my life, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. "You're still my brother," I said. "I don't have to like you, but I don't have to destroy you either." That afternoon, I sat in my office, my real office, with my name on the door again, and watched the city through my windows. The phones were ringing, reporters were calling, investors were demanding explanations. But for the first time in 24 hours, I felt calm. Sarah appeared in my doorway around 5 o'clock. She'd changed clothes, fixed her makeup, done something with her hair. She looked like the woman I'd married, the one I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Can we talk?" she asked. "What's left to say?" She sat down across from my desk, the same chair she'd been in that morning when she was still engaged to my brother. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know that doesn't mean much now, but I needed to say it." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do it?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes again. "Because I was scared," she said. "Scared that I wasn't good enough for this life. Scared that people would always see me as the girl from Queens who got lucky. Scared that one day you'd realize you could do better." "So, you decided to leave me before I could leave you?" "I thought if I was with James, if I was part of the family that owned everything instead of the family that built everything, I'd finally belong somewhere." I leaned back in my chair, studied her face. "And now?" "Now I realize I threw away the only person who ever really loved me for who I was instead of who I could become." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "The divorce papers, already signed." I took them without opening them. "The house in the Hamptons is yours, and I'm increasing the settlement to $200,000. Her eyes widened. "Michael, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. 8 years of marriage should be worth something, even if they ended badly." She stood up, walked to the door, then turned back. "For what it's worth, you were always good enough. Better than good enough. I was just too stupid to see it." After she left, I opened the divorce papers and looked at her signature. Sarah Elizabeth Hartwell, soon to be Sarah Elizabeth Morrison again. The girl from Queens who'd tried to become someone else and lost herself in the process. I signed my name next to hers and put the papers in my desk drawer. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same office, looking at the same view, when Jessica Walsh knocked on my door. Sarah's former best friend, the one who'd helped plan my destruction. "Hello, Michael," she said, looking nervous but determined. "I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "About a job. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm good at what I do. Marketing, PR, social media management, and I know all the players in this city." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What makes you think I'd ever trust you?" "Because you're smart enough to know that someone who helped plan your downfall would be very useful in planning someone else's." I had to admit, she had a point. "Sarah hates me now," Jessica continued, "says I manipulated her, pushed her into the affair with James, which isn't exactly true, but it's not exactly false either." "And James?" "James is living in a studio apartment in Brooklyn and working at a car dealership. Turns out, when you don't have daddy's money, life gets pretty hard pretty fast." I leaned forward, interested despite myself. "What about Dad?" "Retired, moved to Florida, spends his time playing golf and telling anyone who'll listen that he always knew you were the smart one." Too little, too late. Maybe. But Jessica had something else. Information, gossip, the kind of inside knowledge that could be very valuable to a man in my position. "There's more," she said. "Sarah's pregnant." That stopped me cold. "What?" "About 3 months along. She hasn't told anyone yet, but I saw the doctor bills. She's seeing an obstetrician." I felt something twist in my stomach. "Is it yours?" "No, the timing doesn't work. It has to be James's." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. Sarah was having my brother's baby. The woman who destroyed my marriage was now carrying my nephew. "Why are you telling me this?" Jessica smiled. "Because information is currency, and I'm hoping you'll find this information valuable enough to give me a chance." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd helped destroy my marriage, who'd poisoned my wife against me, who'd been part of the conspiracy that nearly cost me everything. "You start Monday," I said. "Probationary period, 6 months. One mistake, one hint of disloyalty, and you're out." Her face lit up. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "No," I said, "you won't, because if you do, I'll destroy you so completely that Sarah and James will look successful by comparison." She nodded, understanding perfectly. After she left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about Sarah and the baby she was carrying. Part of me felt sorry for her. Pregnant and alone, her marriage plans destroyed, her future uncertain. But another part of me felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She'd made her choices. Now, she'd have to live with them. A year later, Hartwell Properties was stronger than ever. We'd expanded into 3 new markets, completed 2 major developments, and our stock price had tripled. The financial press called it one of the most remarkable corporate turnarounds in recent memory. I was working late one evening when my security guard called up from the lobby. "Mr. Hartwell, there's a woman here to see you. Says she's your ex-wife?" I looked at the clock. 8:30 on a Friday night. "Send her up." Sarah looked different when she stepped off the elevator. Older, more tired, but somehow more real than she'd ever been when we were married. She was carrying a baby, a little boy with dark hair and James's eyes. "Hello, Michael," she said quietly. "Hello, Sarah. This must be my nephew." She nodded. "His name is David. David Morrison. Not Hartwell." "I thought it was better this way. A fresh start." I gestured toward the couch by the windows. "Please, sit down." She settled onto the couch, adjusting the baby in her arms. He was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the complicated family dynamics surrounding him. "I heard about James," I said. "He's doing better. Got promoted to sales manager. It's not much, but it's honest work." "And you?" "I'm a teacher, 3rd grade. It doesn't pay much, but I love it." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city lights twinkle below us. The baby stirred in her arms, but didn't wake up. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said finally. "For what?" "For not destroying us completely. You could have. You had every right to. But you didn't." I looked at her. This woman who'd been my wife, my partner, my greatest betrayal. "You're family," I said simply. "Even now, even after everything, you're still family." She started crying then, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks without making a sound. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for all of it." "I know," I said. "I forgave you a long time ago." "Why?" I thought about it for a moment. Because holding on to anger was eating me alive. Because revenge only feels good for a little while, but forgiveness lasts forever. And because that little boy deserves better than to grow up in a family torn apart by old grudges. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You're a good man, Michael. I forgot that for a while, but I never should have. You're a good woman too, Sarah. You just got lost for a while." She stood up, adjusting the baby in her arms. "I should go. I just wanted you to meet him, and to say thank you." "Sarah?" I called as she reached the door. "If you ever need anything, for you or for David, you call me, okay?" She nodded, unable to speak. After she left, I stood at my window, looking out over the city I'd conquered and lost and conquered again. The Hartwell Properties logo glowed from the side of our building, a reminder of everything I'd built and everything I'd nearly lost. My phone buzzed with a text message from James. "Thank you for giving Sarah my number. I want to be a good father." I smiled and typed back. "Everyone deserves a second chance." 2 years after the night my empire almost burned, I found myself standing on another rooftop terrace. This one was smaller, more intimate. The party was for the opening of our new community center in Queens, the neighborhood where I'd grown up, where it all began. The crowd was different this time. Teachers, social workers, local business owners, kids from the neighborhood. Real people living real lives, not the artificial elite who'd celebrated my destruction 2 years ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, looking out over the faces of people I actually cared about. 2 years ago, I lost everything I thought mattered. Tonight, I'm celebrating everything that actually does matter. The crowd applauded warmly. In the back, I spotted Sarah holding David, who was now a toddler with an infectious laugh. James stood beside them, not the golden boy I'd grown up with, but a working man who'd learned the value of earning his way. Even Dad was there, looking proud for the first time in years. Not proud of my money or my success, but proud of what I'd chosen to do with them. "This community center represents more than just a building," I continued. "It represents the idea that where you come from matters less than where you're going. That family isn't just about blood, but about the people who choose to stand by you when everything falls apart." After the speeches, after the ribbon cutting, after the last guest had gone home, I found myself alone on the rooftop again. But this time, I wasn't planning anyone's destruction. I was planning how to build something better. Jessica appeared beside me, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd turned out to be the best marketing director I'd ever had, fierce in her loyalty and brilliant in her strategy. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. "Just thinking about how different everything looks from up here." "Different how?" I gestured toward the city spread out below us. 2 years ago, I thought success meant having the biggest building, the most money, the most power. Tonight, I realized success means having something worth fighting for. And what's worth fighting for? I thought about Sarah teaching third graders to read, about James working honest hours for honest pay, about Dad finally understanding what really mattered, about a nephew who would grow up knowing that family meant showing up, not just showing off. Everything, I said simply. All of it. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Michael Hartwell. Mr. Hartwell, this is Detective Morrison with the NYPD. I'm calling about your brother, James. My blood went cold. What happened? There's been an accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. Your brother and his family were in the car. The world stopped spinning. Are they? Your brother's in critical condition. The woman and child were taken to Presbyterian Hospital. They're asking for you. I was in my car before the detective finished talking, racing through Manhattan traffic, running red lights, not caring about anything except getting to the hospital. I found Sarah in the emergency waiting room holding David, both of them covered in bandages but alive. When she saw me, she broke down completely. "He pushed us out of the way," she sobbed into my shoulder. "The car was coming right at us, and James pushed us out of the way." I held her while she cried, this woman who'd betrayed me, who'd broken my heart, who'd given me the greatest gift by showing me what really mattered. "Where is he?" I asked. "Surgery. They won't tell me anything because I'm not family." "You are family," I said firmly. "You're the mother of his child. That makes you family." I marched to the nurse's station, used every bit of influence I had to get answers. James was alive, but barely. Internal bleeding, broken ribs, possible brain trauma. The next 24 hours would be critical. We waited, Sarah, David, me, and eventually Dad, who flew up from Florida the moment he heard. We sat in that hospital waiting room like any other family facing a crisis. All our old grudges forgotten in the face of something bigger than our petty wars. James survived. Recovery was slow, painful, but he survived. And somewhere during those long nights in the hospital, watching my brother fight for his life, I realized something important. Revenge had felt good for a while, getting back what was mine, proving I was stronger and smarter than they thought. All of that had satisfied something dark in my soul, but it was temporary satisfaction, hollow victory. What lasted was forgiveness. What mattered was family. What counted was showing up when people needed you, not when it was convenient or profitable or satisfying. James spent 3 months in rehabilitation, learning to walk again, learning to use his right hand again. I visited every day, sometimes with Sarah and David, sometimes alone. We talked about things we'd never talked about as kids, about Dad's favoritism, about feeling inadequate, about the pressure of living up to impossible expectations. "I never deserved the company," he admitted one afternoon, struggling with his physical therapy exercises. "I knew that, even when I was taking it from you." "Why did you do it then?" He was quiet for a long time, concentrating on moving his fingers. The doctors said he'd regain full function eventually, but it would take time. "Because I thought if I could prove I was as good as you, Dad would finally love me the way he loved success," James said finally. "Stupid, right? Not stupid. Human. I destroyed your marriage." "No, you didn't. Sarah and I destroyed our marriage. You were just the method we used." When James was finally released from the hospital, I offered him a job. Not a pity job, not charity, but a real position managing our Queen's development projects. Work that mattered, work that helped people, work that let him earn back his self-respect one day at a time. He said yes. 3 years after the night that almost destroyed us all, Sarah remarried. Not to wealth or status or social position, but to Tom Chen, a fellow teacher who loved her for exactly who she was. I walked her down the aisle, gave her away to a man who deserved her. "Are you happy?" I asked her as we waited at the back of the church for her cue. "Happier than I've ever been," she said. And I could see she meant it. Tom loves David like his own son, and he loves me even though he knows all my mistakes. "That's what love does," I said. "It sees everything and chooses to stay anyway." The wedding was small, simple, held in the community center we'd built together. James gave a speech about second chances and redemption. Dad cried during the ceremony, probably for the first time in his adult life. I sat in the front row, watching my ex-wife marry a better man than I'd ever been, and felt nothing but joy for her. After the reception, James and I stood outside the community center, watching the last guests leave. David was asleep in his arms, the little boy who'd brought our family back together without even knowing it. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. "Any of it?" I thought about that question. Did I regret the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me? The revenge that had felt so sweet? The forgiveness that had felt so hard? No, I said finally. All of it had to happen exactly the way it did. The betrayal showed me what I was really made of. The revenge showed me what I was capable of. The forgiveness showed me who I wanted to be. And who's that? I looked at my brother, this man who'd tried to steal my life and ended up saving it in ways he'd never understand. Someone worth forgiving, I said. 5 years later, I was back on a rooftop terrace. This time, it was the opening of our newest project, affordable housing for working families in Brooklyn. The same kind of families we'd grown up in. The same kind of people who deserved a chance to build something better. The crowd was huge this time. City officials, community leaders, families who would be moving into the new apartments. Sarah and Tom were there with David, who was now 7 and asking endless questions about how buildings were made. James was there with his new girlfriend, a physical therapist who'd helped him through his recovery and stayed to help him through everything else. Dad was there too, in a wheelchair now, but still sharp as ever. At 85, he'd finally learned to be proud of what we'd built together instead of what we'd torn apart. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking out over the faces of people who'd trusted me with their dreams. 5 years ago, I thought success meant winning. Tonight, I know success means building something that lasts longer than your own lifetime. The applause was thunderous. In the crowd, I spotted faces I recognized. Kids from the community center who were now in college, families who'd moved out of the projects into our affordable housing, small business owners who'd gotten their start with our microloans. This building represents more than affordable housing, I continued. It represents the radical idea that everyone deserves a safe place to call home, that families matter more than profit margins, that community is stronger than any individual achievement. After the ceremony, after the tours, after the last photo was taken, I found myself alone on the rooftop again. But this time, I wasn't alone for long. Sarah appeared beside me carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd started doing that at every opening, a little tradition that reminded us both of where we'd come from. Thinking about the old days? She asked. Thinking about how far we've all come. She nodded toward the crowd below, where James was showing David how to read blueprints, while Tom talked to potential residents about the building's green energy features. Do you think we would have ended up here if none of the bad stuff had happened? I considered that. No, we needed to break before we could build something better. Do you miss it? The anger, the revenge, the feeling of winning. I thought about the night I'd walked out of my own IPO party, planning the destruction of everyone who'd betrayed me, about the satisfaction I'd felt, watching their panic, their fear, their realization that they'd underestimated me. Sometimes, I admitted, it felt good to be right, to prove I was stronger than they thought. But this feels better. Building something that helps people feels better than destroying something that hurt me. Sarah smiled. Tom says you're the most dangerous kind of person. What kind is that? Someone who's learned that winning isn't the same as being right. As the evening wound down, as families began to head home to apartments they could afford in a neighborhood they could be proud of, I realized something that would have shocked the man I'd been 5 years ago. I'd gotten everything I'd ever wanted by letting go of everything I'd thought I needed. The company was more successful than ever, but success meant creating jobs and building communities, not just accumulating wealth. My family was closer than we'd ever been, but that closeness had come through forgiveness, not dominance. My reputation was stronger than ever, but it was built on trust and integrity, not fear and manipulation. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between being powerful and being strong. Power meant controlling others. Strength meant controlling yourself. As I walked to my car, I passed a group of kids playing in the building's courtyard. One of them, a little girl about David's age, ran up to me. Are you the man who built our new home? She asked. I helped, I said. But really, your parents built it by working hard and believing they deserved something better. She thought about that for a moment, then smiled. Thank you for helping. As I drove through the Brooklyn streets where I'd grown up, past the bodega where I'd bought my first lottery ticket, past the school where I'd learned that being smart wasn't enough if you didn't also work hard, I thought about that little girl's smile. That smile was worth more than every dollar I'd ever made, every deal I'd ever closed, every enemy I'd ever defeated. It was the smile of a child who would grow up in a safe home, in a strong community, with the knowledge that people cared enough to build something good for her. The revenge I'd planned 5 years ago had been about proving I was better than the people who'd hurt me. The success I'd built since then was about proving that better was possible for everyone. I pulled into my driveway, the same house in Manhattan I'd lived in during my marriage, but transformed now into something warmer, more real, more like a home than a showcase. Inside, the walls were covered with photos from community center graduations, building dedications, family gatherings where everyone actually wanted to be there. On my desk was a letter from a young man named Marcus, a kid from the community center who just graduated from college with an engineering degree. He wanted to work for Hartwell Properties, wanted to help build the kind of communities he'd grown up in. I made a note to call him in the morning to set up an interview, to maybe find another person who understood that building something good was harder than tearing something down, but infinitely more satisfying. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Great event tonight. David wants to be an architect when he grows up. I texted back, tell him he can start by building a better world. 5 years ago, my empire had almost burned to the ground. Tonight, looking at everything we'd built from those ashes, I realized that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is losing everything you think you want so you can build everything you actually need. The company was stronger, the family was closer, the community was better, and the man I'd become was someone the man I'd been would have respected, even if he wouldn't have understood him. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the same brand James used to keep in his penthouse, the same bottle I'd drunk from the night I'd confronted him. But the taste was different now. Not bitter with revenge or sweet with victory, just smooth with satisfaction. The satisfaction of a job well done, a family restored, a community built, a life lived with purpose instead of just ambition. Outside my window, the city sparkled with possibility. Somewhere out there, families were sleeping safely in homes they could afford. Kids were dreaming about futures they could actually achieve. Communities were growing stronger instead of just richer, and in Queens, in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in every corner of the city I'd helped build, there were people who understood that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what's really worth having. I raised my glass to the window, to the city, to the family that had betrayed me and forgiven me, and taught me that both were necessary for becoming who I was meant to be. To second chances, I said aloud, and third chances, and as many chances as it takes to get it right. The whiskey was smooth, the night was quiet, and tomorrow there would be more buildings to build, more communities to serve, more chances to prove that building something good was the best revenge of all.